Hi, everybody, and good Friday afternoon. This is our hurricane Q&A. Today, of course, we're talking about Tropical Storm Erin and eventually Hurricane Erin. But we have a system in the Gulf, and we're live this afternoon on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. Are we live on Instagram? That's a question. We're on X, I know, and we're on LinkedIn. So hopefully you're joining us on one of those platforms, or you can, if you want to tell somebody, just tell them find your nearest social media platform, and we're there live, and we're here to take your questions. You know, back years ago, we used to do this all by telephone, but it's not a telephone era now. So here we are set up to take questions. We've already got some questions in. I'm here in South Florida, but in New York at Fox Weather headquarters. Jane Manar is with us, and Jordan Overton is running the controls there. Hi, guys. Hi, Jane. How are you?
Good, Brian. Happy to be here. A lot of chatter. Will Aaron curve? Will it get too close? I think everybody's just kind of waiting with a little bated breath.
Yeah. When the systems are developing, the models tend to dance around a little bit, and that's a interesting thing. Jordan, we've gotten some questions in. Do you have one just to kind of
You know,
start
I
with here?
I have one
Or do
which
you have it,
actually,
Jane?
Brian, it might be
Okay.
we're going hard right out the gate because actually this is the first time that this has been brought to my attention, but I want to bring it up. Let me see if I can pull it up right. I favorited it. I go over to my favorites, add to broadcast. There it is. Aaron, obviously, but it looks like Herbert, but it's the A Bear box, right?
Bear box, yes,
Yeah,
from Paul, named by for Paul Bear, who was a big hurricane guy and the meteorologist in charge of the Miami National Weather Service office back in the day. He was a wonderful, fantastic meteorologist and a great guy. He just passed away, I want to say earlier this year or last year. But the Bear box is there are actually two of them, but the main one is down kind of, if I remember right, northeast of Puerto Rico. And back when Paul did this, he looked historically at storm tracks, and a lot of Miami storms went through the Bear box, went through this box. He drew this box, and he said, if we're going to get a hurricane, we're going to look in this area here. So, the great 1926 hurricane went through there. Well, since then, we've had a lot of hurricanes here in South Florida that have not gone through the box. But so we don't really pay, honestly, much attention to it now because now we can so much more easily look at historic records. Back then, Paul was doing this by going back on papers and archives and
right.
so forth. A whole different kind of thing than all of us have right now, just going on the internet. But anyway, that's what it is. It's a box, and maybe we can find it here this afternoon and show it on a map and show exactly where it is. But that's what it was about, and I don't remember when Paul did that. My sense is it was in the 80s that he drew that box. So why don't we take a look at what's going on out there right now, Jordan? And if you want to punch up the maps, and we're going to take a look at what's going on in the Gulf of Mexico, because the National Hurricane Center kind of suddenly popped up a 40% region here. So that's in the medium range, and they sent out hurricane hunters in a big hurry to check it out because they looked at the satellite picture and they thought, oh boy, that's really flaring up. And the hurricane hunters actually are still in there right now. And for the longest time, in fact, on Fox Weather, just a little while ago, I was kind of analyzing what the hurricane hunters were finding, and they were finding this kind of a sharp wind shift. So coming here out of the southeast, and then there more out of the southwest or the northeast, and indicating that not a circulation. Well, since then, just in the last, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, they found very light west winds right in here. So, I mean, technically there are winds that are circulating, but they're very, very, very light. And the question is whether it's a well-defined circulation, and the Hurricane Center is going to have to analyze that. But if you look right in the loop end there, right in there, and here I can go on now, you can almost make out some kind of a lightness there, which is probably what's called a sucker hole, where some dry air has gotten in there, and it just kind of looks like an eye, because we know in something this weak there's no eye, and the winds here, the top winds I've seen were up near 30 miles per hour up in this band up in here. So anyway, bottom line is they're giving it a 40% chance of becoming a depression. It's heading in the direction, it's heading this way, heading the direction of the northern part of Mexico and the southern part of Texas. So especially east of 69C, maybe in the Rio Grande Valley, then you're going to have more moisture there, potential for flooding here. Starting tomorrow or later today, and especially tomorrow into Saturday, as that tropical moisture gets in there. And of course, you can have very heavy rain there in South Texas, pushing up into South Central Texas as well. So everybody in Texas there, stay aware of the local situation. You might have some local flooding from that system, even if it becomes a depression, but we don't expect it to be anything too significant. All right, let's take a look at the end of the cone, because this is what everybody's sort of jazzed about, of course. Is there any chance that this thing is going to come in here somehow? We don't see any indication or any significant possibility of some kind of crazy, unexpected thing here. The idea of the system curving up between the Cape Hatteras part of the East Coast and Bermuda looks like by far the most likely. Exactly, though, where it goes here is still an open question. How close does it come to Bermuda? In any case, in Bermuda, they have to keep their eye on this. Also, it looks like there's no way we can avoid along at least a good part of the East Coast, Southeast, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, that this is going to have an effect along the coast. I think that's very, very likely. So let's take a look at the cone here. Here's the idea. If we were to extend the cone out, it would be somewhere up in there, right? And this is where we would expect it to be. So if it's here on Tuesday as a category 3, almost a category 4, then what is it here on Wednesday? So let's kind of imagine. We're going to look at the computer models. There's where the afternoon European model came in. There's where the AI version from the European Center came in. The Google model is from earlier. We'll get that a little bit later on. The GFS is here. So we'll see if this one ends up over in here somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised, because as the system gets better defined, generally the forecasts tend to hone in a little bit on each other. But in any case, the idea is that it comes up in here and stays the center of it off the East Coast. That doesn't mean we're not going to have effects on the East Coast. All right, here is the 11 a.m. advisory. Now we're going to have a 5 p.m. advisory here probably before we finish this Q&A. 60-mile-an-hour winds, west at 17. We can see the very dark, kind of black representation there from the satellite. That shows very tall clouds. That shows an intensifying system, and they're calling it 60 miles an hour. We'll see once we get measurements there, 999 millibars. All right, looking at it close up, we can see, though, that the circulation is kind of out in here, right? And as the clouds kind of flatten off there, what that tells you is that there is a wind flow pushing dry air that way and kind of drying out this side of the system. So it's developing, but the situation is still not pristine there like it's expected to be downstream, where it's expected to develop rapidly. We can see there is still some dust, but if you've been watching this, you see there are a lot more clouds in here. That means there's a lot more moisture with this system than there has been. It's tending, so what it does is as it gets over warmer water, it pulls up more moisture, and that tends to push the dust away. And that's a part of what's happening, besides the dust is just thinning out. And where is it in terms of the moisture? Well, there it is. And it's only over 80-degree water or so, just warming up. And as it moves up this way, it's going to get in a much more pristine atmosphere, warmer water, less dust. So that's why the Hurricane Center is calling for it to significantly intensify and intensify pretty rapidly. So the idea is a hurricane tomorrow morning, and then intensification. So when it gets near the islands here, it's a strong category 2, category 3 hurricane in this area here. So let's look at that close up and the effect on the islands. Now, remember, again, that this is where the center of the storm is forecast to track. 2/3 of the time, it would stay in a circle the size of that cone right in there. If I could draw better, it'd be a lot better. But the storm will likely be bigger than the cone and extending outside the cone. So the Hurricane Center takes into account that the storm could be bigger. It could be left of the cone, for example. And so they put out wind speed probabilities, or the chances that you have winds of a certain strength. In this case, tropical storm, which means 40 miles per hour or higher sustained winds. And so in Puerto Rico, for example, it's right there in the yellows and greens. And you can see that's, say 30% to 35, 40% chance that you're going to get 40-mile-per-hour winds at the surface. That doesn't count up on the hill where it would be stronger. That doesn't count the gusts. So that can be, that can cause power outages, and that can cause trees to come down and so forth, but not a terrible hurricane or anything like that. There's high confidence that the worst of the storm is going to be offshore, and it'll be on the right side of the motion. So there's the motion. Right side would be over here, would be the worst of the storm, but there will be a tail sticking down. And so this tail is where you're going to have the squalls, and they are likely to come through the islands. So that's going to happen, looks like probably late Saturday and Sunday as the storm is passing on by, the worst of it passing on by. Okay, back to that beginning. Let's look and see how our fancy new models do with where the end of the cone is. Remember, Hurricane Center forecasting 125 miles per hour at that point. And yes, there's the cluster from our 4 models, the GFS and the Euro or the ECMWF. And now we have the new AI models from Google, and that one is from the European Center as well. There's our cluster for Tuesday. Now, that was the end of the cone. Now let's go forward, and we see the cluster expands some, but the core of it is over in here between the Carolinas and Bermuda. And then we have some stragglers over here that we would be normally worried about. But as we go forward, we see they tend to filter out, and there is always noise on the edges. What you look for is where is the core of this, and the core of this is well offshore of the U.S. East Coast. Question mark about how Bermuda deals with it. And each of those colors is a different model, so we get some confidence of the uncertainty here. But notice these over here are just kind of spread out a little bit, very low odds right there. So, okay, we're going to keep an eye on the hurricane hunters working on this thing in the Gulf, Jane. And while we're doing that, let's see what kind of questions we have coming in here this afternoon.
I've got a couple for you. So a couple comments, folks coming in from Florida, worried, Miriam, looking at this forecast. But I think given your analysis, better confidence that we are going to see perhaps a lesser impact. But I've got this one for you off Facebook. Jose saying he's headed out of Miami on Sunday on a cruise towards the Eastern Caribbean, and they're going to be on Monday. He says Bimini here, but he followed up, he'll be in Coco Key. So basically wanting to know what the conditions are going to be like. And I think for anybody getting on a cruise ship, leaving out of Miami's port, headed towards the Caribbean islands with a major storm like this, definitely some concern.
Yeah. So, well, let me say this, that the cruise lines are outstanding at this. And they're not going to put the ship in any kind of danger, and they're not going to put the passengers in any kind of danger. So, and they're monitoring, every part of this, and they do their own modeling and so forth. Different cruise lines do different things. But there is going to be a very strong storm offshore here on, wasn't it Monday you said that?
Yeah, Monday.
Jose was heading out there. So look where the storm is forecast to be on Monday. That's going to be putting a lot of energy in the water around the Bahamas. Bimini is just between Miami. The machine here isn't letting me point, but Bimini is that little dot just offshore of Florida, between Florida and the main Bahamian Islands. It's the closest island to Miami. And the Coco Key and the other keys that the cruise ships use are in that protected area. So first of all, tend to be protected by the outer islands, but a big hurricane putting a lot of energy in there is going to put a lot of swells. So exactly what the cruise line is going to do, I don't know, because they do have to dock when they go to Coco Key, or they go to these other places. They have to dock, and docking with big swells obviously is difficult. And sometimes they actually take people off the ships on tenders, but they have to get people off the ship. And then if the ship is going up and down, it's not in danger, but you can imagine that that would not be ideal. So I don't know. You know, you're going to have to. They're going to have to deal with it somehow, and you're going to experience it if they don't go a different way. Sometimes, instead of going east, they'll go through the Straits of Florida and take you over toward Cancun or something to get away from it. If their analysis is that the swells are going to be a problem, but it is a question you're going to have to ask.
Yeah, I think the cruise lines definitely know it. They've been through this season after season, so
Exactly,
it's just
yeah.
about keeping everybody safe on the ship. How about this one? Has a hurricane like this ever went off course and went west? So
Yeah, so I
essentially,
think
right, getting closer to the United States.
right. What the concern is there is, mind it go out of the cone on the left side. I mean, theoretically, it's possible. And certainly, the answer to the question, has it ever happened? Oh, yeah, it's happened. But we just have different technology now. And the odds of it doing something like that, based on what we know now with the modern computer models and the analysis that we have, is very, very low. I mean, I would put it in the single percents range. And there's always single percents that something very oddball is going to happen. And very occasionally it does, but not in a well-developed storm that we're tracking for a good while that is moving. Usually when things go haywire, it's because the storm isn't moving much and it's not organized, and it's drifting one way or the other. Hurricane Joaquin comes to mind. That was definitely a problem in that regard.
Well, speaking of turning west, how about this one? There's been a couple models that certainly have been out there. And so Kimberly asking, what is the Icon model and how does it compare to the Euro and the GFS model?
Well, the Icon model is a relatively new global model. It's like the GFS and Euro, is in that it forecasts all around the Earth. It's done in Germany, and it's shown some skill. It's generally not regarded as one of the models that we look at for hurricane tracks. I know it's online. A lot of people point to it, and that doesn't mean it can't occasionally be right. But of course, I don't know if this is fair to the folks that are building the Icon model, but the metaphor is that even a blind squirrel sometimes finds a nut. So just because any model is right sometime doesn't mean that it's great. But these things are rated every year by the Hurricane Center and research scientists to determine which models are performing the best. And the Icon has not been rated one that we consider for tropical storm tracks. Some of these other models are actually tuned for that and are better at it.
Let's take a look up the coast. North Carolina, obviously eyeing this one closely. I mean, we talk about, even if this makes a curve, we're probably going to have not probably, we will have a ton of wave energy out there. So impacts to a place like Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, though several days out, what do you think our biggest concern is?
Well, yes, for sure in North Carolina, you're going to have effects, especially around the Cape and the Sounds there. So there, let's imagine that the storm is up in here somewhere on Wednesday. It's going to be putting energy back toward the Cape this way. That's going to be pushing ocean water in big, long period swells up against the Cape. Now, is that going to break Highway 12? It really depends on how big the storm is. The storm is going to grow in size. So right now it's very small, but as storms turn north, they grow in size for a couple reasons. One is they get energy from the dip in the jet stream that is propelling them north. The other is that the thing that makes the storm spin in the first place is called the Coriolis effect, and it's because the Earth is spinning. And if you think about it, the equator is moving faster than a point higher up on the Earth. And if you really have to kind of, back in meteorology school, I remember thinking about all this. Go, oh yeah, that's why it spins counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. Well, as the storm gets farther north, the Coriolis effect of the spinning of the Earth affects it more. So that tends to get more air spinning, and so the storm grows in size. So you end up with a bigger storm up here, moving more water. So I would expect, obviously the closer it is to the coast, the more that we'll get. And as we saw with Hurricane Helene last year, remember, it was 100 miles offshore of Tampa, and there was tremendous storm surge in Tampa Bay. So we're going to get storm surge from this. Exactly how much will the National Hurricane Center will be calculating that, and we'll announce it a couple of days in advance what the models show, because it really depends on exactly where it is and how big the storm is forecast to be and how strong the storm is forecast to be. But you need to plan to take action there beginning Tuesday, I would say, with the hurricane down here somewhere. If the hurricane is on Tuesday, say it's down in here, it's going to start putting energy in that direction. So probably by late Tuesday, you'll start seeing water rise here. And then especially when it gets north up here and the water rise comes in on the north side up here, up around Duck and the northern part of Cape Hatteras, where, we've had the issues with Highway 12 being washed out and so forth. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
Right.
that is a possibility depending on how much energy we get. And then, by the way, it spreads up the coast. This is going to be a significant thing for all the beaches, for Ocean City and Rehoboth and up to the Jersey Shore and Long Island and Cape Cod, especially places that have sand beaches that are subject to beach erosion. This is going to be something that we need to be aware of, and we'll see what's going to happen. It just depends on exactly the angles and the strength of the storm and how far offshore it is.
Any kind of late summer beachgoers, vacationers, kind of an unlucky stretch there in the Cape for the last 2 weeks. We were shut down, no beach access because we had Dexter, right? And then kicking up all the waves and the rip current risk, keeping people out of the water. And then now we've got this moving up the coast through the week ahead. So Bryan, from Joe from YouTube joining us, a lot of us remember Hurricane Andrew making that hard left turn directly into Miami. High pressure to the northwest, that won't cause that this time. What's your take there?
Well, Hurricane Andrew made a left. It actually, if you go back and look at the track, it wasn't a hard left. It's because if you live in South Florida, the difference between Boca Raton and Miami seems like a long way because the traffic is terrible. It takes forever to get between Boca Raton and Miami. But from a hurricane standpoint, that's not that much of an angle difference. So the forecast actually was for it to go into about Boca, the Broward and Palm Beach County line, and then it deviated south, and the next forecast jumped way south to South Dade. A lot of people thought that they heard somewhere, oh, Dade Broward line, but that was just somebody approximating. That wasn't actually the official forecast. But the angles there were small. But in any case, yes, it took a left that was not forecast. But the difference here is, first of all, 33 years of technology are different, significantly different, dramatically different. But secondly, the Andrew was in this very developing stage. When this storm, which this one is more developed than Andrew was on the Friday before it hit Sunday night. So Andrew was a very fast developing system with computer models and technology that just couldn't deal with that. And then there were other issues as well. The model that sort of had it right from the beginning was called the AVN. Today we call it the GFS. The GFS is the successor to the AVN many times over. That sort of had it right. But the very first time anybody had ever seen that run was during Hurricane Andrew, because back then they didn't have the computer resources to actually test the model ahead of time. So what they did is they tested it in real time and just didn't tell anybody about it. And the forecasters looked at it, but didn't trust it because they were seeing it for the first time. But it was the one that actually turned out to be the best model. And it wasn't great. It said Cuba sometimes and it danced around, but it did have that left turn before the other models did. But it's just, again, a whole different era in how we do things, how we test things, the computer power that we use to generate these forecasts. So,
and it's still changing, right? Now we've got AI and all new things to
exactly. And this year, in the same kind of way, in real time, we're evaluating the AI, right?
Exactly.
Right?
And we see those models' outputs, and we're still wondering, can we trust this yet? I mean, we start to look at trends, and okay, maybe it's trending that way the last couple of runs, but I'm hard pressed to completely give a full stamp of approval to something that's so brand new.
We all are, but the Hurricane Center is tested it. This is a little bit different because they have been tested in a way. The way they've been tested is they've been run on historic storms. So now we have the data and the computer power and everything to be able to do this sort of thing. So we can go back and look, how did that do on Helene? How did that do on Milton? It didn't do great on Milton, by the way. It did great on Helene. How did it do on Otis, which all our regular models did horrible on? It did pretty well, talking about the Google DeepMind model.
Right.
So you can go online to the Google Weather Lab website and go back and look at those storms and see how well it did. So in the past, we couldn't do any of that. So we can have some more confidence now than we could back in the day with these things because we have that retrospective ability.
Yeah. You talk about Helene and how the Google DeepMind model actually did a really great job with Helene. So Carolyn putting up this comment on Facebook, Western North Carolina, we can't take another hit. So I guess some concern, not only looking at the season ahead of what some tropical influence could do as it kind of comes up the mountains. I think as far as Erin goes, I'm more confident that it's going to be mostly a coastal impact than it would be to kind of put rain up in the mountains. Exactly.
Don't worry about this one, Carolyn. This one is not for you. This is Adair County, coastal, Cape Hatteras thing, and right at the coast too. I mean, really right along the coast, because I don't think the weather impacts are going to be huge, but it's more a surf and water impact that we're going to have to be concerned about, and to exactly what degree we don't know yet.
All right, this one coming in with will this storm in theory, quote, jam up the works as far as the overall pattern goes? I don't know if I've heard that one before, jam up the works, but I guess coming in from the Ohio Valley in the 90s for an extended period of time, and we're talking about high pressure building on the East Coast, that maybe would prolong and stall up the pattern?
Well, yeah. So this is really something we talk about more with typhoons in the Pacific than we do with hurricanes in the Atlantic. But the idea is the same. If you have this giant low pressure system that, in some sense, is dominating the weather pattern in the ocean off the east coast of the U.S., that keeps the ridge that's in the west or over the middle of the country that's making all the heat from migrating. Everything gets kind of stuck in that pattern. So, but this is going to move. This is there's no stalling here. So this is going to be swept out to sea later on next week and be a big North Atlantic storm. So in that sense, no, I don't think this is really going to be the main effect on exactly where that ridge sets up that causes the heat there in the middle of the country.
Yeah, so Bryan, I'm going to jump in here really quick. Talk about our TikTok viewers, of course. We have a lot of them joining us this afternoon. The discussion on TikTok.
I always love the TikTok questions.
The TikTok, they're great. They're talking about a lot of things. It's pretty active over there.
As they always do, yes.
Some of the questions coming in is really about North Carolina, the East Coast, but also we have a lot of viewers from New Jersey and New York and up into Maine, New England, and they're concerned about, that it keeps going west. It keeps going west. And until it turns, is there going to be a bunch of big waves? Is there beach weekend going to be ruined? Because a lot of them are like, I've got plans to go to the beach next weekend. Right. Do I need to be concerned? So that's a big conversation on TikTok.
I know we have a graphic. Maybe you can pull it up. that shows the timing up the East Coast. So, yes, this is going to be significant along the Jersey Shore. For example, later on in the week. So Wednesday, I mean, on the one I have, so Jordan is getting it. So Wednesday into Thursday, this is going to move up the coast and the Jersey Shore, but also the southern coast of Long Island. I mean, August hurricanes are really a pain in the neck because people are obviously still on vacation. Yeah, that wasn't the one I was thinking of, Jordan, but here, let me take that and we can use it. So there you see Tuesday. So if you look over here on the upper left here, you can see, well, it's not letting me draw again, but if on the upper left, you see the date. See, Tuesday the 19th. That's next Tuesday. Okay, so let's see where the oranges and reds are, where the energy from the storm is along the coast. And there you see where it is here, mostly from Cape Hatteras south on Tuesday. But watch as we go forward in time here. And here we go to Wednesday. And you see where the center is well offshore, but now it's putting this northerly flow against the Cape. And now all along the Jersey Shore, south of where it says New York there, you have this energy directly in, this strong swell directly against the coast. So what's that going to do? It's going to raise the water level against the coast. It's going to make very strong and extremely powerful waves. Having lived with hurricanes along the coast, been out in the ocean and hurricanes, surfed in hurricanes, I can tell you that the undertow is stunningly strong. So these days, back in my day, it was, every man for themselves there at the beach. These days, they don't let you get in the water, and they really, try and keep you out of the water when it's dangerous like that. And that's probably going to happen, and we're probably going to have a beach erosion problem along the coast there. And as we go forward in time, you can see where those winds are blowing, and it goes all the way up. This is going to be Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. Although up there, even though on Nantucket, on the ocean side, you do have beaches, and that water is going to be, you're going to have water rise there. That is going to affect those beaches, and there are rookeries and all kinds of places that are preserved and all that along Nantucket. And but many of those coastlines, on the other hand, are raised and there are rocks and so forth. And that's the case in Maine, for example. So always a combination of effects when you get up into New England. But yes, so just again, because the question was from New Jersey.
Wanting to know what that weekend forecast looks
like.
So,
so by the weekend, so this is Thursday. So by the weekend, it should be fine in New Jersey. I mean, there may be beach issues. I can remember big storms offshore and you had all kinds of debris on the beach and so forth. So you can imagine things like that. But the water should be calming down by that time because the winds will be switched around. And I would expect it would be pretty warm, as a matter of fact. I don't know the forecast. Let me just take a look here. See, next weekend. Yeah, they've got temperature forecast on Sunday for 90 in New York City. With maybe a stray shower. So yeah, the weather is not so affected, but it does affect the wind direction, and the wind direction does affect the ocean. So I think the weekend is going to be fine, but during the week it can be dangerous. Is it going to affect Canada? Linda, I don't, depends on where you are, I guess. I mean, in Nova Scotia, this is going to definitely affect coastal Nova Scotia and eastern Atlantic Canada, up around Newfoundland. No doubt there'll be very high water there, but this shouldn't be anything. You're not looking for a direct hit at this point. Looking for the storm to stay offshore, and you have a very elevated coastline and you know how to take care of the boats in the harbors and stuff like that. So I wouldn't expect a dramatic effect on Canada based on what we know now.
Looking at these wave heights going into the weekend, I mean, you talk about the surfing. I mean, there's so many popular surf breaks up and down the Jersey coastline, out on Long Island, you get the Rockaway Beach. So, I think it naturally, when you see a wave height forecast like this, you're going to want to bring a lot of people to try and surf it. But it is a danger that I think has become increasingly more into the conversation, how rough the water is, how hard those waves crash. I think I wouldn't be surprised if many of the beaches starting about Wednesday of this week, at least through the start of the weekend, would be closed to even the surfers.
Yeah, I don't know enough about surfing on Long Island. Like, I didn't know they surf at
Rockaway
Rockaway.
Beach. Oh yeah, that's like
Do
a
they?
popular
Oh, I
one.
didn't know that. Okay, but and I know, so people in those various places know that if the wind is coming this way and the storm is located here, that's when we get our maximum surf. Because
Yep.
when you get Rockaway, the far Rockaway and all that, that's New York City. So we're talking about, that's in New York City. That's part of New York City in Brooklyn. So, or is that Queens? Rockaways are in
It's Queens.
Queens.
Yeah.
Queens, yes. Right. So anyway, but that's New York City. So that's way tucked in there in the corner between Long Island and Sandy Hook, New Jersey, and
Right.
all of that. So exactly how the currents flow to make the surf there, I don't know.
But I think you go out towards the Hamptons, and then you're really kind of
Right.
open yourself up to not only the big waves, but you mentioned the beach erosion. So I think that's something I think these coastal towns would be looking at on how does this storm shore up our beaches? But Jackson Network, so this is coming in from YouTube, lives on St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands, wants to know when they'll start to see impacts.
Well, your main impacts are going to be this weekend. So let's look at that more closely here. And I'll bring it on. Let me see if I have to kind of guess exactly what I'm looking at here. But all right, so here we can see. Let me see. What do I have to do? I have to do this to make this thing work. Okay, and it still doesn't want to exactly work. All right, now I can do it. Okay, so there are the Virgin Islands right there. So you can see that Saturday morning, what's going to happen is the winds are going to come around this way. You're going to get the north flow Saturday morning. Then it'll be passing you Saturday night. And then the tail comes through on Sunday. So some impacts begin, I would think, Saturday morning. You may even notice them late Friday night, depending on how strong the storm is, but more likely Saturday morning. And then the tail could be the strongest part in terms of the squalls coming through, just because you end up with if you have a storm up in here, you end up with a kind of a tail that sticks down, sometimes a feeder band, and that feeder band can drag through. The good thing is that you are going to be on the weak side of the storm, but the squalls in those feeder bands can be very strong. So you're going to be ready for that, and that's likely going to be late Saturday into early Sunday, maybe even overnight Saturday night. Check Jane's mic there, Jordan.
There I am.
Yeah.
Bryan, you mentioned the weak side of the storm, and I always like to think of you cut a hurricane or a tropical system into our 4 quadrants, right? And so that's where you can really start to dissect the forward speed and the motion, where you're going to get the dirty side and the strongest winds, the push of surge. So the orientation of how this storm is moving north of the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, even the Bahamas, once we start to see that curve, is kind of what shields them from what you would consider to be the worst part of this.
Yeah, and an August hurricane, that's true. It's not true in an October hurricane or a hurricane that is kind of curving to the right coming out of the Caribbean. The right, as you look at it like that. But in an August hurricane, yes, storm's moving this way. So if this storm has 120 mile an hour winds, and let's say it's moving at 15 miles per hour, then that it's 120 over here because the storm has 105 and the motion gives it an extra 15.
Right.
But on the other side, you're taking that away. So on the other side, nominally, it's 90 miles an hour of the circulation. So the winds are weaker, but it's not always that clean.
Right.
Because you do have bands of storms that have very strong gusts. And when you talk about what in a hurricane does the damage in terms of wind, it's the gusts. And sometimes the gusts in a band that is is trailing the storm can be the worst thing you experience from any part of the hurricane. It can be worse, gustier than the main storm if you got on the fringe of that, for example.
So I'm gonna jump back in on TikTok, which, by the way, we'd love to hear where you're watching from. If you're what platform you're on, tell us where you're at, where you're coming from. We'd love to see that. We're awaiting the next update from the National Hurricane Center. That comes in here at the top of the hour. Once we get that, we'll kind of go through it together here. But on TikTok, we have a lot of people from the southeast and Texas asking about that disturbance. Some of them saw the update to 40%. They saw some pictures on social media of like, oh, the odds went up. This was nothing. Now, is this going to be something? So there's a lot of questions around in the southeast, not even just Texas, but we had a couple from Louisiana asking, is this disturbance going to be a problem for them? Invest 98.
So it's not going to be a problem for Louisiana, and looks like the only place it would be any kind of problem in the U.S. will be the Rio Grande Valley, South Texas, and some of that moisture will get up into South Central Texas. I don't think it'll make it up to the Metroplex, but in Austin, San Antonio, and so forth, you might get some of it. Most of it in coastal areas of South Texas in terms of being a threat, like a flood threat, for example, which may very well be the case beginning tomorrow there and on into Saturday as that moisture goes north. But here, let me just bring up the latest satellite picture. I was just looking at the, let me see, what do we have here? Is this something new, Jordan? I'm seeing a little yellow thing here. Let me see what we have. Is this any kind of update on the Invest 98? I don't see any. All right, they're estimating, 30 miles per hour. Looking at the hurricane hunters, 30 miles per hour is what I saw, and you can see where the clouds are, where the thunderstorms are, right up in here now. Now look at the visible picture, and you can see this kind of dark area in here. That's not an eye. That's some dry air. It's called a sucker hole. But you can kind of make out it's trying to wrap around like this. And hurricane hunters are finding some very light west winds there. But this whole area down here has almost no wind. So I'll be surprised if they make this a depression. But this is a good surge of moisture, and it's heading up toward north of Tampico, up toward Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley. It will not affect, it's going to go inland into Texas, and that's going to be it. So no concerns elsewhere in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, the timeline of this is pretty quick, but it does bring some rain in spots like Brownsville, maybe up to Corpus Christi. This coming in from Red Cyclonic on YouTube. I do have a science question about hurricanes. What is it that's making hurricanes turn northward early before making a landfall?
Okay, let me try and let's think here, Jane, what the question is exactly. Turn northward early.
So I think early is the one word. It all depends on, and it doesn't necessarily want to turn early. It just has a lot to do with what the steering currents are doing. Like in the case for Erin, that high pressure in the Atlantic, as it weakens going into the start of next week, that's what kind of opens up an opportunity for a storm that naturally wants to turn north.
Yeah, well, okay, storms want to naturally turn north. We're talking about an Erin kind of thing. Just because of the spinning of the Earth, storms, it's called the beta effect, storms want to turn north. And so it takes high pressure blocking to keep them from turning north, essentially. So let me see here. I think I have actually something I can, let me turn that on there, and let's load this. So there's that. They want to do that, but and here you can see this map goes out to next Thursday. So this is a week from now, and just an estimate, right? So Erin has been driving around this high pressure. So this high pressure has been a blocking high pressure system that's been keeping it from turning north, even though Erin wants to turn north, but it's keeping it from doing that. But it's going to go up into this void. So here's Erin next Thursday, and here's a big low up to the north up here. And so this low is splitting the high. We have the big high that one of our viewers was talking about in Ohio. And then you have the high out over the Atlantic, actually with a flow like like this. So there's this gap, and it's going north. That's very, very typical. That's what happens when the storms turn to the north. Now, and if we're talking about though that there is this kind of phenomenon we've seen when storms get near the coast, it seems like they jump one way or the other, and usually, and that's very complicated, but if a storm is kind of weak, remember what was the one? It went into Louisiana, southwest of New Orleans. Was that last year?
Francine?
Francine. Very good,
Yeah.
Jane. Thank you. So Francine, remember, it kind of jumped to the right. But Francine wasn't symmetrical. It wasn't organized. So when the thunderstorms and the winds hit the coast, they get diverted by the increased friction over the land, and that can affect, kind of makes the storm wobble, in essence, and that can affect what happens to it. And a lot of times we see storms take a little bit of a jog toward the right at the coast that we wouldn't even count out in the Atlantic. But since it's near the coast, then this town yes, this town no, or oh, suddenly it moved over there, and we noticed that it moved 15 miles.
Right.
Because we're zoomed so close into the coastline. Back to the idea, there's about 25 miles between Fort Lauderdale and Miami. But it makes a huge difference. Does the storm come into Fort Lauderdale or does it come into Miami? Right, that's a tremendous difference. But it's only 25 miles, and in the scheme of the ocean, that's nothing.
Not all too much.
So the more you zoom in, the more these things do seem to jog around.
Bryan, we just got the 5 o'clock advisory in. And I think the biggest update here is that tropical storm watches have now been issued for portions of the northern Leeward Islands.
Yeah, so that's not a surprise.
No.
Well, first of all, remember that the watches and warnings for Anguilla, Barbuda, Saint Martin, both Saint Martins actually, or Saint Martin and Saint Martin, they're all issued by those governments, or the government of France, Météo France, for example. So these aren't the National Hurricane Center advisories or watches and warnings. They're by these other countries, but the Hurricane Center, of course, does the U.S. Territories, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and they're not quite there yet. So no, the timing is right, as we were talking about with the cone there, that we're talking about Saturday for this thing having an effect. And I was going to bring up my cone, which I have here. I don't know, Jordan, maybe if you want to see if you can find, I don't know why I can't.
Yeah, I'll work on getting it here for you.
Lay my hand. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is, because I'm in the wrong place. Okay, here we go. I got it. Anyway, going back to what we were talking about a moment ago in terms of the timing for the islands, nominally the watches go out 48 hours before it's going to affect the islands. We tend to get it for U.S. Areas, especially coastal areas in the continental United States, a little before that, because people need to get going. Oh, here's the new track, by the way. This is
new track and intensity. In fact, we had a question on intensity. Let me see if I can find that.
So here we have.
Here it is.
Okay, so a hurricane by tomorrow afternoon, and then, which is, again, it was right earlier tomorrow before, right? The idea is that in this area here, it's still not super conducive, but then once it gets over in here, it's going to get much more conducive. So we're talking about a little bit of slowing in the intensification process, but in the end, by Monday and Tuesday, we end up the same. But notice the track is essentially the same here for the next 5 days. And to answer the question about the watches and warnings, so here we are on Thursday afternoon, go 2 days to Saturday, and there we are. And there are those northeastern Caribbean islands, Anguilla, Barbuda, St. Martin, have all issued the tropical storm watch, thinking they're going to be on the weaker side of Erin as it moves by to the north.
Okay, so I have this question, Bryan, coming in from Oh, here it is. Okay. From Joe on YouTube. Although track error has improved tremendously since the time of Hurricane Andrew, intensity forecasting remains challenging. Do the new AI models forecast intensity better?
I haven't seen any indication they forecast intensity better. The Google DeepMind model actually makes a real effort at it. So far, the before that, the AI models really didn't try very hard, and the way they didn't try very hard is that they didn't put in data related to the core of the hurricane, which is where the intensity happens, and the steering currents are big features, right? And the storm is like a cork in the steering to a significant degree, not totally, but to a significant degree. But in terms of what makes it intensify, we don't know 100%, but it's related to what's going on and the details of what's going on near the center. So the Google DeepMind researchers have put in that data over the last several years and said, okay, when that storm looks like this and has this kind of data in its core, then the AI knows, okay, this is what happens. And so it's not just looking at the broad strokes. And that's why, perhaps that's why it's done well on some storms with intensity. It's still not great. Didn't do great with Milton last year, but it has done quite well, and that's why the Hurricane Center is consulting it, just to have it part of the suite of data and guidance that they look at. So, is there anything else that we need to say? I can look at, I have here what the Hurricane Center is saying, that Erin has changed a little in organization. Let me see. The current wind speed held at 60 miles an hour. Storm continues to produce strong thunderstorms. But the thunderstorms confined mostly to the southwestern quadrant, as we showed
With
earlier.
that kind of northeasterly shear a little bit.
Right, with northeasterly shear blowing on it. Yeah, so going back and looking at that here.
I think going to the intensity, they note in their discussion that it should be noted that there is some guidance that suggests a possibility Erin could intensify further than shown in the official forecast. And I think you could look at the environment that Erin is going to be moving in, even as it's taking that turn. Water temperatures, low wind shear. I mean, there is a pretty good indicator, I think, in my mind, that we could absolutely be on the higher end of that major. I mean, Cat 3 at the very least.
Well, they say the rule is if they're forecasting a Cat 3, you plan for a Cat 4 because just the general plus and minus, the average error would take you into the Cat 4 territory. And so we definitely should think that. The models that have been showing this extreme intensification are the hurricane-specific models. And indeed, when we look at the projected, let me see if I have that. Well, maybe I do. Oh, there it is. Yes. So what is forecast by one of the models called the SHIPS model, which talks about how much shear, how hostile the upper level winds are going to be, shows that the winds get a little bit hostile around the Caribbean, but then they really let up as it's beginning to make that turn to the north, and also the amount of heat content in the water really picks up there north of the Caribbean islands, north of Puerto Rico. So these things are forecast to come together, and if they really come together, in a absolute way, then yes, we could get even a stronger storm there. Then normally the storms weaken as they get picked up in the kind of jet stream dip that's going to come down and lift it north. They'll start to weaken some.
I wanted to ask your opinion. So right now, I mean, forecast for Tuesday afternoon at 1:25. The stronger the hurricane, is there any correlation there with perhaps really significantly impacting that recurve? If we have a stronger storm, is it more likely to, want to move, or is there, a stronger storm and it kind of slows up? What's the...
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily make a distinction between, a category 2 and a category 4 or something. But when a storm, because as long as it has tall thunderstorms in it, it's generally going to then get picked up by higher level flow, and which is that dip in the jet stream that's turning it north. It's what can really fool you are storms that can have a big swirl, but they don't have any thunderstorms because they've been in the dry air. So they tend to go west farther than you think, because they don't get picked up by the steering currents. They're caught in the trade wind flow farther west. So a lot of times after storms weaken, you see them then are driven by the low level flow. Here we can see on the satellite, here's that what I was talking about. See how flat it is here on this side here, there, and that's the dry air being pushed in this way by the upper level winds, or the mid level winds actually pushing on that. So it's still a somewhat hostile environment, and maybe even a little more hostile than we were thinking it would be by this time. But all indications are that it is going to get into this very ideal environment.
Absolutely. So we're putting up the watches now that have just
Right.
been issued with this new advisory. Anguilla, St. Martin, St. Bartholomew, right? Barbuda.
St. Bart's. Yeah, we say
St. Bart's,
St. Bart's,
shorten
yeah.
it. So there you have it. But like you mentioned, this isn't actually coming from NHC. This is coming from the office out of France,
Well, the
or
various
their
governments
locals.
in
Right.
charge there. For instance, on St. Martin, which is really not St. Martin, it's the one side, the French side is Saint Martin, and the right side is, I won't try and pronounce the Dutch, but it's essentially St. Martin, spelled differently though, because it's the Dutch word. So you have two different governments there, although they obviously cooperate. And Saba and Saint Eustatius down there to the south. So you have that little cluster of islands, but you can see why, because they're first in line. And the National Hurricane Center will be issuing watches for the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, I'm sure later on tonight or in the morning at the latest, just because that's the way the timing works.
Yeah,
out.
timing, right? We're looking at,
Right.
a window of at least 48 hours. So here we stand Thursday afternoon. You can imagine if impacts begin Saturday, we're following right within that window.
Exactly.
I did have a question here. Okay, here we go. How close is Erin passing by the U.S. Virgin Islands, especially on St. Croix? So given that we have these alerts
so
up.
St. Croix, let me see here. Let me go down here. Let's see if I can always mystify it on the system. Well, it's not. You see where it says U.S. Virgin Islands there. St. Croix is the bottom island. So St. Croix is going to be, the farthest.
You should be able to draw
from-
now, Brian. If you want to get the pen up, you should be able to draw.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, there we go. That's St. Croix right there. So, I mean, we could do a measurement up to the closest point, but it's going to be a good ways away. You're going to have fringe effects in St. Croix. This isn't going to be a big hurricane hit. It's not going to be a memorable storm on St. Croix, I don't think, unless something really freaky happens. So I wouldn't be too concerned. Just good common sense when those bands come through, probably on the tail, probably Saturday, is when you'll get the worst of it. But you'll know that there's a storm out there, I think, before that. But when it'll be more in squalls than in any kind of continuous strong wind or strong rain event, I would think, based on what we know now.
So, Brian, I want to bring up this question because rapid intensification has been a hot topic for the last several hurricane seasons. When you talk about how warm the water temperatures have been and the correlation of these really strong storms. So this question, is it true that when a hurricane rapidly intensifies to a strength where it can create its own steering currents?
Well, sort of. What you're thinking of is the stronger the storm gets, the more air it's putting out of the top of it. And so it's not that it creates its own steering currents, but it creates its own kind of bubble that can protect it from outside influences. So in some sense, it affects the steering because it builds a bigger high pressure system aloft, and air is flowing out of it that affects the atmosphere around it. So, everything else being equal, if the storm is weaker, there's less air flowing out of it, and therefore the surrounding weather systems are less affected by it. So that's what happens. It's not so much it creates its own steering currents; it just creates its own environment that can indeed affect the steering of it. And sometimes it kind of pushes stuff out of the way, in a sense. We've seen that in storms coming across the islands.
Brian, we got a quick question coming in from the TikTok viewers. The TikTok viewers are now asking about the Category 6. There's everybody's saying Category 6, Category 6. Is that possible? Is that a thing? So kind of goes into our intensity question. But can there be a Category 6?
Well, there is no official Category 6. The scale was designed by a famous Miami architect named Herb Saffer back in I think the late 60s. He actually originally noticed the Richter scale for earthquakes and thought, well, we need something like that for hurricanes. And so he originally came up with it, took it to Bob Simpson, who was the director of the National Hurricane Center, and they came up with the Saffer-Simpson scale. Well, the Saffer-Simpson scale, the numbers were based on damage. And the idea is if you have a Category 5, that you get catastrophic damage. So as long as the scale is based on damage, what's the word beyond catastrophic damage? Right? So that's why there's not really a Category 6. However, what's happened recently is we've had these storms that have been up at 185 miles per hour, Dorian, for example, that just seemed off the charts. Now, in fairness to storms of the past, we didn't measure storms in the past like we measure storms now. But also, there's good science that says that storms in a warmer atmosphere will be a little bit stronger. Mm-hmm. So should we add a category that describes these storms with the bottom line or the cutoff being 180 or 185 miles per hour or something like that, kind of being super hurricanes? I mean, I haven't been in favor of it, honestly, because you don't want anybody thinking, oh, it's only a Category 5. Right. Unfortunately, we get that already with, oh, thank goodness it's not a 5, it's a 4, or thank goodness it's not a 4, it's a 3. And, some of the most expensive hurricanes we've had have been 3s and 4s. So these are all terrible storms. So a 6 from a communication standpoint, I don't think really helps us at all.
And I think when
but that's what they're talking about. That's been the talk.
Right, and having to remember that, you're categorizing a hurricane purely based on wind, but we know that wind is not the only impact from tropical systems. Surge, rain, freshwater, flooding, all of which has to be taken into account. Brian, this is a fun one. Have you ever flown on a hurricane hunter, either NOAA or Air Force?
I have not. I've been invited many, many times. And but I'm always stuck in some studio when these things happen. And I mean, I would obviously love to do it, but that's why I would. I certainly have.
We've gotten you mic'd up.
Communicated with people in the plane, done everything else. They've been on the planes, but no, I've never flown in a plane through a storm.
I think our Ian Oliver has, if memory serves me, right? I mean, I feel like.
But by the time by the time hurricanes started happening again, in the late '90s, remember it was '95 when we started having regular hurricanes. Then I was involved with the network and had lots of responsibilities in terms of broadcasting. Mm-hmm. So there really wasn't an opportunity to go do it.
I've got another question for you out of the Gulf of America. Is it possible for a storm like Patricia or Otis to happen in the Gulf? I mean, given how warm the basin is right now and how warm the past couple of years are, I guess just to see a storm that can rapidly intensify so quickly, so close to land.
Well, Otis, for 100% absolutely sure, that is possible. Now, it's very, very, very unlikely that we would have such poor forecasts as happened with Otis. But the phenomena of having a small storm not too far offshore spin up into a Category 5 hurricane, absolutely that's possible. In fact, the 4 Category 5s that we know about that have hit the U.S., all of them spun up quickly and were, well, for instance, Andrew was a hurricane two days before a Category 1, just became a Category 1 48 hours before it hit as a Category 5. And the other storms, Camille and the 1935 Keys hurricane and Michael, were similar. If you remember, Michael, the intensity was a big surprise. So yes, if storms that aren't very big in diameter can spin up very, very quickly, it's because there's not a lot of air going. If you have the energy and you have the atmosphere and the diameter of the circulation is not big, then it can spin up quickly because you just don't have that much to get going. That's not generally going to happen with a big storm, although sometimes they can intensify amazingly rapidly, like Katrina did when it ran over that loop current in the Gulf and had all that extra warm water underneath of it. And that was a moderate-sized storm at that point that grew to a giant-sized storm, obviously, as it moved farther north. But yeah, now Patricia is a different thing. Patricia spun up quickly. I mean, when it was off the charts, 215 miles per hour, I think, right? Could that happen? In theory, yes, it could happen over a loop current in the Gulf, where you have this superheated, deep water and a storm that isn't moving very fast and is spinning and is churning up the water, but it's only churning up more heat. So it's not churning up cool water as storms normally do, which sort of has a tendency to control them a bit, especially slow-moving storms. So yeah, it could happen. It just takes exactly the right combination of things that obviously we don't know about any storms in the Gulf that have spun up to the intensity of Patricia.
So it's not just a Pacific thing, but I think we always have to look at, anywhere close to home where water temperatures are warm. That loop current in the Gulf, wasn't that responsible too for Milton last season?
Right.
And the rapid intensification we saw there.
And in 2005, we had it happen with Katrina, and we had it happen with Rita, and to some degree with Wilma. Of course, Wilma had its big peak intensity in the Caribbean, but as it came up through the Gulf, the loop current isn't big, and you have to be kind of stupid unlucky to have 3 hurricanes encounter the loop current in one season. But that happened in 2005, especially Katrina and Rita.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to jump in. We have some questions coming in from TikTok still, our loyal TikTok viewers. The consensus right now is, are there flights going to get canceled or delayed next week across the East Coast? We've got some people flying internationally. We have some that are going from like the Northeast to the Southeast. There's people going to Florida, people going from Florida to the West. And everybody's like, is my flight getting canceled midweek next week?
So I would think not, although the reason, I don't think it would be canceled because of weather at the airport. Although, you always have to be a little careful because obviously the storm could go a little farther west and you could have some issues, but I doubt that. More likely, if there were cancellations, there would be cancellations because of air route problems. Like the hurricane will cut off at some point. They won't be able to fly on a route north to south in the Atlantic, and so that jams all the traffic farther west, and sometimes that can limit the number of planes that are going to Florida, for example. This is always a problem with North Carolina thunderstorms that move out over the Atlantic that limit the number of routes going between the Northeast and Florida, and they have to end up canceling planes or delaying things and so forth. So I could see how, if the storm is far enough west, that could be a problem. Going to Europe, they can go around the hurricane with no problem. And actually, you can fly over hurricanes. The issue is because hurricanes aren't that high in the atmosphere, not like thunderstorms. So I remember flying over Hurricane David, matter of fact, in 1979. Yeah. We landed in Fort Lauderdale in pretty good winds, But David was out there. We were at whatever we were at, and
I hope you had a
it was
window
not
seat.
not an issue because hurricanes. The reason hurricane hunters can fly through them is because they're horizontal. Their energy is horizontal. Yes, you have these in the eye. You have these thunderstorms, and in the bands, you have these tall thunderstorms that have vertical turbulence and vertical motion. But in between that, it's all horizontal. So that's what how they can fly, and they're not super tall in the atmosphere like hurricanes are. As long as the hurricane isn't too strong, you can actually fly over top of it.
I hope you had a window seat. So, Bryan.
It was night, actually. It was at night.
At night. Oh, well,
Yeah.
we've been getting actually a couple questions here. Just kind of, I think anybody living in Florida wants to know 100%, are we in the clear? Still kind of maybe a tough question, I think, along the immediate coast, maybe to say, like, as far as wave impact and rip current risk impact. But what do you think? Do you think Florida is 100% good to go by not getting a landfall or an impact like that?
Yeah. So yes, you're exactly right, Jane. No landfall in Florida is going to happen. This is not going to be a Florida hurricane. But from from Palm Beach County north, the coastal impact could be significant: beach erosion, very strong currents, dangerous rip currents, big waves. Might make the surfers happy, but dangerous conditions. And I bet that some of the beaches are going to be closed because of that. But in terms of a direct weather impact, knocking out power, taking down trees, causing problems, no, that's not going to happen in Florida.
If I could just jump in really quick on that, there are some people that are asking about storm surge. And can you maybe talk about the difference of, okay, we're talking about there's going to be these large and dangerous waves, there's going to be rip currents, but that's not storm surge. Can you kind of talk about the difference between those two things?
Yeah. So storm surge happens because the wind in the hurricane pushes the water toward the coast, and there's more. It keeps pushing it and keeps pushing it and keeps pushing it, and there's more water being pushed toward the coast than the beaches can hold. So it goes up over the beaches, or it goes in the rivers, and it rises along the sides of the rivers, and the rivers overflow, and so forth. That's what causes storm surge. So what it takes to get storm surge, it takes persistent wind blowing in one general direction. Well, if a storm is moving parallel to the coast, the only way that's going to happen is if the storm is so big that when the top part of the storm is blowing this way, and then more storms blowing this way, and more storms blowing this way. So storm has to be a big diameter. Well, we're going to get a big diameter storm when it gets up off of the Carolinas, say. It's going to grow in size. So I'm expecting some water rise along the coast from the Carolinas north, especially. And we'll have to see exactly how big is the storm, how strong are the winds, and how fast is it moving. So how long is that water pushed toward the coast? So that's a different phenomenon. That's water rise at the coast and pushing against the coast. That's a different phenomenon than the energy that's put in the water that you feel in the ocean that creates rip currents and so forth. They're interrelated, but they're not exactly the same thing. So anyway, but both affect the coast and both can be dangerous. So there'll be a lot of evaluating of how safe it is to be at the beach all along the East Coast here, coming up starting early in the week.
Absolutely. John Ross, happy birthday. 36 years old. Wishing
that's a great age, John. I remember that, sort of.
36. Wishing you, John, a great year ahead. We've got Roblox Dev. How many years, Bryan, have you been a hurricane specialist?
Well, that's a good question. So when I went to meteorology school, I studied tropical weather among everything else. It was a thing. I studied it with a great guy named Noel Lesueur. Dr. Noel Lesueur was a renowned tropical guy way back in the day at Florida State. And But it wasn't a specialty of mine or anything like that. I got interested in hurricanes by studying the history of Miami, because in the 80s I was producing a program called Neighborhood Weather locally here in South Florida, and I would go out and tell stories about different locations. And I ended up going to the Historical Museum, and I had all these came across all these stories about Miami hurricanes. Miami used to have a lot of hurricanes. It was a regular thing to have hurricanes in Miami. Just to give you one stat, in the first 7 decades of the 20th century, so the aughts, teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, up to the 60s, 7 times the eye of a hurricane came over downtown Miami. That doesn't count the Category 4 in Fort Lauderdale. That doesn't count Andrew. That doesn't count any of these other storms, or the 45 South Dade storm. It doesn't count a whole bunch of other hurricanes, but 7 times the eye came over downtown Miami. So South Florida was a very busy hurricane place for a long time, and then they just kind of quit in the 60s, and then Andrew came along, and so forth. Then we've had a few other storms. Obviously, Wilma in 2005 was consequential, but that was a Category 1 in Miami. Did all that damage. Category 2 in parts of Broward and Palm Beach County. But we haven't had the big hurricanes like we had in the past here in South Florida. So that's what got me interested in hurricanes. I was thinking, if I'm ever chief meteorologist, people are going to ask me about hurricanes. I better learn a lot about hurricanes. And so that's what, when I became chief meteorologist of WTVJ here in Miami, I set out to study hurricanes, and then Hurricane Andrew happened, and I realized that I didn't know enough, and that's when I dedicated myself to learning about everything I could about hurricanes, and worked closely with the Hurricane Center, and it's it's an asset to be here in Miami, to have hurricane people
Absolutely
all around that study this for a living.
It's an asset to us here at Fox Weather as well, across anywhere along the U.S. coastline to have your expertise. Bryan, Mia wanting to know, what advice would you give to those interested in studying meteorology?
Well, the advice I always give first, depending on how old you are, Mia, is learn math. Be good in math.
I echo that statement.
If you're good in math, meteorology is so much easier and so much more interesting, because meteorology is difficult physical science, and physics is based on calculus and differential equations and advanced math. So learn math when be a whiz in algebra and geometry and trigonometry, and then calculus will be easy, and then differential equations will be a lot easier, and all the other different kinds of math that you end up using, depending on how advanced scientific meteorology that you want to study. They made me learn all that stuff at Florida State in the day.
I remember getting my syllabus when I was going to be a student at Rutgers. This was even before I committed to going, and seeing all of the calculus classes. That was a shock. I was like, oh, okay, here we go.
Well, I had a little bit of advantage. I was a math major as an undergraduate.
There you go.
So that really helped me when I finally went back to graduate school and studied meteorology.
Yeah, Calc 2, 3, differential. Bryan, homes in Pinellas County, Volusia County, Nassau, Bahamas, so obviously coastline that's very vulnerable. And Jordan King wants to know the chances of getting out of this entire hurricane season unscathed.
Well, Jordan, lucky you. Houses all over the place.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, so, what are the chances? The odds are, pretty much that we're going to have a Florida hurricane every year. It's a big, long coastline. Obviously, if a storm hits the Keys, that doesn't affect Pensacola, but it's a big, long coastline, and so the odds are always the highest that you're going to have a hurricane hit in Florida, and it's almost one a year. So, is it going to be your area? The odds are low in any one spot, but all those places that you mentioned are in the hurricane zone. So, the only thing to do these days, because in Florida we have terrible insurance, and the insurance system really doesn't work at all to speak of, as people that went through Ian are still finding out, not to mention Helene and Milton. So that means you got to make your homes strong and resilient, and you have to have a hurricane plan for dealing with it so that your need for insurance is minimized. There really is no other way to deal with hurricanes in Florida now besides that.
I think preparation can be hard when you're thinking about things like that, when it's difficult to get insurance. But, I always say protect your life, property second, because, things can be replaced, of course, but you always don't want to go through that. Greg White commenting that the 12 noon icon shows 160 mile per hour hurricane over the Bahamas in 6 days. So, Bryan, this is one of those examples of, taking one of those deterministic models, putting it out past 5 days and seeing what it spits out. And oftentimes it can be kind of head scratching or, open your eyes a bit.
Yeah, just looking at the icon here. Yes, it swings the storm far west, kind of just offshore, just right up the Bahamas. But like I said earlier, we don't use the icon as a hurricane model. It's much better to, I'm not saying it's a bad model, but it's not designed for tropical systems. So it's much better to focus on the ones that are tested and evaluated every year, and we understand the errors and so forth, and are used in the consensus. It's actually not a good idea to look at any one model. You want to look at the consensus of models year after year after year. That's been proven to be the most reliable thing to look at. The most modern consensus is something called the HICA, HCCA, but it's essentially, in terms of accuracy, the same as what's called the simple consensus, which is called a TVCA, or we just call it consensus here, and that's an average. The HICA is what's called a corrected consensus that does some tricky math to try and improve a little bit on just the averaging of the key models, and they do a lot of work to figure out what are the best averages. Is it just the GFS and the European? Should we include the AI models? That research is ongoing right now. But it's the consensus that counts, not any one individual model. We've learned that very, very well over the years.
Bryan, this is an interesting question. Does baroclinic fronts help peak hurricane strength before shearing them? I've seen powerful hurricanes peak from the same front that shears them later.
Yeah, so it's not the front, but fronts are driven by dips in the jet stream, or more technically called troughs. And there's this issue of good trough, bad trough. Good trough in the sense of good for the hurricane, intensifying the hurricane. And what happens is that sometimes a dip in the jet stream comes along, and what it does is it pulls more air out of the top of the hurricane, which allows more air to rush into the bottom, which allows it to intensify before the flow across the top gets enough to shear it or tilt it over or create hostile upper level winds. So it's really hard to tell. We debate this all the time when a storm gets farther north and this dip in the jet stream is coming along. At what point is it going to start to create hostile winds and weaken the storm? And just before that, might there be a sweet spot where it actually does enhance the storm and intensify the storm? And that does indeed happen, and that's part of forecasting.
Bryan, I'd love to hear, if we have anyone from LinkedIn, we'd love to hear you comment. We haven't gotten any comments from LinkedIn yet, so if you're watching us from there, let us know where you're watching from. We've had a couple people from Georgia, Carolinas. I saw a couple from actually England, the UK. We had a couple of viewers from there this afternoon watching us. But yes, if you're on the LinkedIn, we'd love to hear from you. Let's talk about 98L. I'll bring in this question from Corbin Butler. Will Invest 98L be tropical storm?
So I don't think it will. Let me just check the recon here, and let's just see if there's anything new with the recon. Looks like they're sending another sending a NOAA mission in right now, but I still don't see any significant winds on the southwest side of it. So I doubt this is going to be a depression, and almost certainly not going to be a tropical storm. That is the next name, by the way. Fernand is the next one in line. More likely, this 98L is going to come ashore as a moisture surge, and there's still a chance it could close off as a depression. It has a bit of time before it reaches Mexico and southern Texas.
Bryan, you mentioned the recon. That actually leads me to a question of my own. You know, this is the first time that we're going to get recon flights into Erin, right? And that data is going to be now finally ingested into our models to help us improve our accuracy of how strong this storm is going to become, and then ultimately how it tracks out. So what's your take on their flight and their mission, their position mission, as they go out there throughout the rest of this evening?
Yeah, so anytime now that we get data from hurricane hunters, that goes into the models, and it's demonstrated that we have two different kinds of data. We have one of the plane that's flying through the storm, and that gives us real detailed information about what's going on in the storm. And as I said, that's the kind of information that the Google DeepMind researchers have put in the model to try and help it with intensity. The other kind of data we get is from the jet that goes out, and it went out to monitor the steering currents essentially around the storm, and that'll go into the models, and this will be reflected in the output tomorrow morning. So we're kind of waiting on that. I was just going to look here to see the mission. So there's a new mission going in to that mission has returned. Okay, that's the one I was looking at before. And here's the flight into Erin. Yeah, so mission 1 into Erin. So they're not there yet. They're heading out to look right now. So they're on their way. So we'll have more information from them coming up this evening, but it won't go into the forecasts really until tomorrow. But this will give the National Hurricane Center a good understanding of exactly what's going on in the storm right now.
We've got this question again. Is there any way that Erin could completely take a different track out of nowhere and hit the U.S. coast, like a direct impact?
Well, I hate to say no way, but the percentages are down in the single numbers that would happen. So the expectation is that it will not happen. The high expectation is that the center of Erin will stay well offshore, and the effects on the coast will be fringe effects. But they could be significant if it stays a little bit closer to the coast, because it's going to be a big hurricane when it passes Cape Hatteras, and it will be putting a lot of energy in the water, and this could have a significant effect along the beaches there. But you never say absolutely never, but because you always have fringe effects, right? Anything that's going to very likely to happen, there are tails out both ways that are very, very low odds. But there's no indication here. This is a very conventional kind of curving north, recurving, it's called, a hurricane caused by a dip in jet stream and a split in the high pressure and so forth. There's nothing wildly unexpected here or unusual about this situation.
Bryan, we have a question here. Are there any other areas of interest that we should keep an eye on? So, of course, we have 98L in the Bay of Campeche, Southern Gulf, but then we have Erin. Keeping our eyes off the coast of Africa as those tropical waves continue to push off.
Yeah, the next one is indeed the next thing off of Africa, assuming 98L doesn't do anything, and I don't think it will, won't do anything significant anyway. But there are more disturbances coming off of Africa, and it looks like one about a week from now, toward the end of next week, might be approaching the islands, somewhere around there not this weekend, but next weekend. So we're going to keep an eye on that. There is no indication in the computer forecast that the main development region down there, the tropical belt from Africa over to the Caribbean, is going to get conducive. There's still dust out there. Still, the systems will have to come in low under the dust if they're going to make it through, or they're going to have to come off super strong, one or the other. So The one that is Erin came off Africa strong enough with enough moisture to fight off the dust. Other ones have to come off low enough to get under the dust and dip under there. If you remember, Beryl last year in July did that. It started so low, even though the dust was really strong, started low enough to dip under. So sometimes disturbances make it west that way. So, but in terms of timing, our best guess right now is the end of next week is something that we might be keeping an eye on. No indication of it developing at this point, but there's an indication that it'll be there and moving to the west.
So we got time for a couple more questions. If you got a question, send it into the chat so we can see it. We'd love to see a couple more. Tell us where you're watching from. Bryan, the TikTok viewers, we're getting some new people joining. People are kind of coming in and out. We got some new viewers from the Outer Banks, from the Carolinas, once again concerned about the impact of Erin mid next week. Can you kind of talk again about what the situation is for the Outer Banks?
So yes, the Outer Banks, there's a reason for concern in the Outer Banks. This is going to be a big hurricane offshore, driving a lot of water toward the Outer Banks. We know how fragile the Outer Banks are there, especially in some places near Rehoboth, for example. I didn't mean Rehoboth, I meant Rodanthe on the Outer Banks. Rehoboth obviously is in Delaware. This is a situation where we're going to have to monitor this closely. Dare County is watching it like a hawk, you can bet, and consulting with the Hurricane Center on what they're going to do, and do they need to do anything in terms of moving people from vulnerable areas where they might get trapped by high water and so forth. But yeah, this is going to be an ocean effects event there for the Outer Banks, and it's, everybody there is just going to have to pay close attention to what the latest forecast is. The Hurricane Center will give you 2 to 2.5 days warning in terms of any storm surge or water rise on the Outer Banks based on the size of the hurricane, the strength of the hurricane, and the track of the hurricane. They put all that into the computer, and they can calculate very, very accurately these days how high the water could be along the coast, and they can get people the right amount of warning. So anyway, the exact impact is unknowable at this time, but impacts from even in South Carolina and then points north have a possibility of being significant, but they certainly could be disruptive along the coast at the very least.
We've got a very nice note for you. After Andrew, Bryan Norcross is always a calming voice to hear, and his expertise is all you need.
And you might notice my voice is actually getting a little bit hoarse. It's nothing like after Andrew. I've kind of learned how to do it now better.
How long were you on air for Andrew? Remind viewers how long you were.
Well, it was a 23-hour day on TV. But it was, and then there was before and after you. But by the end of the TV stint, my voice was like this, and I was barely able to speak. That was not my longest broadcast, by the way. Wilma I was on TV longer in Wilma. That was 30.5 hours.
Oh my goodness.
Which was my longest one. But in Andrew, it was almost continuous talking. It was kind of like this. It was just like continuous,
right.
And at that time, I didn't know how to deal with it quite as well as I do now, but I can feel it, and my Hurricane Andrew friends maybe can actually hear it in my voice. It's a little bit husky.
Listen, as long as you've got a little water on the side, what is it, a little tea to keep you through. But it is, having your expertise and your calming voice, I think that's always something that I try to emulate, because hurricanes and tropical storms impacts, it's scary, right? So you want to have that confidence, calming voice that's going to guide you through the impacts to give you that confidence to get through something.
Yeah, it's it's scary and it's technical, and we don't think of it on the surface as being that technical, but it really is when you get down to the details, and it's the details that count, and people want to understand the details. So, that's I learned that I had that idea was the case before Andrew, and And then after Andrew, when I sort of executed my plan for how to broadcast these things, I figured out, I figured out what I knew and what I did right, and I figured out how I could do it better and what needed to be learned. But that was it. That this is a lot about getting feedback from people and trying to understand where they're at and what's going to help them understand their situation to then more calmly deal with it. That's the goal.
The more you know, the more that you are prepared, the more you understand, the more you can prepare, right? And then you know
Right.
what.
Well, the
what's
more you
gonna move in.
understand, but understanding is important because now it's worse. It's so much worse now when you have icon models and
Right. Social
uh,
media posts with
look at the stuff we put on Fox Weather,
Right.
all these dots and colors and stuff like that. The good thing is when a storm is approaching, you have time to explain that for people that want to know. So, and I found that once people understand their risk, they're much more ready to deal with it. The problem is just understanding what their risk is. It's a hard thing to know when you get all of this incoming data in the modern world and on every social media platform and so forth. So it is challenging.
So, Bryan, I'm going to jump in. This is our last question of the night for this one here. This one comes from Thomas. It's a two-part question, so I'm going to kind of walk us through it really quick. He's from the UK. We don't get hurricanes, just the rain. I can't imagine what all you go through, but his mom lives in Palm Beach. Why do the storms turn north? And then he asked him, he asked again, watched you a lot with my mom living out there. Why do storms turn east, and wish his mom well in Palm Beach, Florida?
That would be his mum because he's British. So why do storms turn north? They turn north because they want to turn north because the Earth is spinning, and it's related to the fact that if you just think of a point on the equator, how fast it's moving in a circle as the Earth is spinning, and think of a point halfway to the North Pole, and think about how fast it's spinning. It's going a much shorter distance in the same amount of time. So it's moving more slowly. So because a big storm the size of a hurricane, the different parts of it are being influenced by the spinning of the Earth in different ways. First of all, that's one of the things that makes it want to spin, but it also makes it want to turn to the north. And then the only reason it doesn't turn north is because high pressure systems block it. But if a high pressure system gets pushed out of the way, like in this case, and there's an opening, then it wants to turn to the north. And the dominant wind flow around the Atlantic is from what's called the Bermuda Azores high pressure system. It spreads across the Atlantic. So if you think about that, it's going from east to west at the south, and then it goes from west to east. And we have the westerlies, right? The wind, the weather at the latitude of Great Britain or the northern United States is moving from west to east. And so once the storms get north, they get caught in those westerlies and get propelled on across the ocean. And sometimes in the UK, you get to deal with the remnants or the combination of a tropical system and a non-tropical system that ends up affecting the UK. I was in England one time for the remnants. Wasn't at all a tropical system, but you could actually feel the tropical air.
Oh, didn't we have one last season?
Yeah, but
was it Kirk?
Was that in England or was that in Ireland? Ireland more
It was
often.
up in the
gets
UK, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
remember
no, it
it's
happens.
the code red, right?
It happens.
Yeah.
The remnants of them. Yes, it happens. And if they're moving fast, sometimes they can maintain even some tropical characteristics. But normally, it's not much of a tropical system the way we think of them in the South. It's more of a nor'easter kind of North Atlantic low
Right.
pressure system.
Right. Still a lot of wind, still a lot of rain, though, and definitely
Yes,
can have
exactly.
some big impacts. But
Yes.
we'll continue to watch Erin, Bryan, right, to see how this ultimately plays
Well,
out.
of course. So we'll be here on Fox Weather, keeping you up to date. So if you didn't see the information on how to get Fox Weather, yes, you can download the Fox Weather app, but you can also go to foxweather.tv and it'll tell you exactly whether it's on your TV or your phone or your iPad, your Roku, your Apple device, your YouTube TV, your Fire TV, whatever, Samsung TV.
We're everywhere now.
LG TV,
LG TV, you name it. Just check it off.
Vizio, watch free, all of that. Anyway, it's all there. You just go to foxweather.tv and it'll tell you exactly how to do it. So let's say goodbye for today, and we'll do this again whenever there's some kind of threat. We'll see whether we do this again for Irma, maybe first part of next week, if it still looks like it's going to be a significant threat. But anyway, we appreciate everybody tuning in today. And of course, the videos will be online, so tell your friends. All the questions are answered right here. All right, guys, have a good day.